So this is a poem that I wrote about a man that I'd met down in West End, which West End is a little suburb just opposite Brisbane City, across the river. Its Aboriginal name is Gurilpa. A lot of people call it Kurilpa, but Gurilpa is the Aboriginal name for this little suburb, and it's a sacred space for many local Aboriginal people and visiting, and it's got a lot of history. So in West End, my wife and I had a gift store there for about 5 years, and in walked one day this man, First Nations man, and probably a little bit younger than me, and we got to know him over the years. He'd drop in, he'd called me Dad and called my wife Mum, and his name was Dusty. And this poem is dedicated to him as he unpacked his life story and his story of his family and a lot of things that I respect about him and those stories he shared. So I'd like to sit back and enjoy this. It's called My Mate Dusty. It was purely by accident that we met that day, strolling down Boundary Street. He was a little unkempt, asking people for money with no shoes upon his feet. I approached him and asked him if he'd like coffee and cake instead, and "Yes, my friend," he said, "but could I change that to a Coke and chicken in bread?" And we sat and talked for a bit, and I guessed he was a little younger than myself. He told me he came from Cherbourg way when I asked him about himself. "I'm pleased to meet you," I said, "and tell me, what is your name?" "Well, they call me Dusty or Nathaniel, but they sound so lame. My real name is Gundu, and I'm a champion boxer's son." "Really?" I replied. "Tell me about his career and what has he won?" So Dusty took a long, slow sip from his icy can of Coke, and he looked down at the ground and he said, "What I'm about to tell you is no flaming joke. My daddy was a great boxer. His name was Jeffrey Dinavere. Back in '62, he won gold in Perth at the Games for the Old Empire. Today they're called the Commonwealth Games, and Jeffrey faced off to Ghana's Samuel Abbey. It was the final between two giants, but it was my daddy who was the least shabby. I went home that night and I Googled it, and sure enough, he was right. His father was a champion Aboriginal boxer that would always win the fight. And a few days later, Gunda came in again to visit us in our West End gift store. "Hey, I forgot to tell you something," he said. "I've got to tell you lots more. My daddy taught me boxing and I became really, really good. But a nasty chap harassed my sister and he was extremely rude. With one punch I hit him and he went down on his knees, and I admit the hit was deadly. And then I saw him, oh, what had I done, oh geez. They took me to the big house and I spent many years inside. But I had a dream about my ancestors that I want to confide. I stepped a little closer as he prepared me for what he had to share. A tear appeared in his eye and he said, 'Let's go outside and get some fresh air.' And as we walked, he told me about his dream that had come to him inside. He shared about a museum telling stories for his people to fill their hearts with pride. He told me about the many who came before him, who excelled at all the sports. Aboriginal heroes that we should all celebrate. His dad, Lionel Rose and sorts. From Goolagong to Mundine to Freedman and Adam Goods. Some names I'd heard of from all the mobs, clans and hoods. And then he turned to me and he said, with a twinkle in his eye, 'Did you know my granddaddy bowled against Sir Donald Bradman? And this ain't a friggin' lie.' I said, 'You fair dinkum, tell me when it happened and what was his name?' 'Well, it was in 31 at the New Gabba. Against New South Wales was the game, and Bradman was facing up to fast bowler Eddie Gilbert, my granddaddy, who was having lots of luck. He had just bowled Wendell Bell, the opening batsman, out for a duck. And Bradman batted up and Eddie did his thing, and he bowled so fast you could hear the ball soaring zing. The fourth bowl was so fast that it hit Bradman on the belly, and the impact knocked his bat off and he truly turned to jelly. And then came the bouncer. Bradman clipped it on the way, and the top edge went straight into the air, and Waterman caught it, and that ended Bradman's day. A few years have passed since we ever caught up again with Dusty. People have told us that he passed to the other side, his body tired and rusty. He had shared many deep things with me over those early years, and he went from months being completely sober to drinking far too many beers. I now miss him dropping in to see us and our special yarns. He had a cheeky smile that ladies would always be charmed. And when he mentioned his 17 children, I almost fell to the floor. How on earth could any man keep up with that incredible score? So to finish up this life of Dusty, Djarapi Gundu story, I'll keep my promise to him to honour his family with the deepest respect and glory.